Hello, everyone, and welcome to this Hot Topics recording where we will go over some of the resources available to help districts look at their preschool budgeting across different funding sources. So I think it's helpful here to start off with our really big picture, asking, okay, why do we care how districts are able to build really high quality early childhood programs? And on this topic in particular, it's really easy very quickly to get deep down in the weeds. So I do think it's helpful. We'll talk here in detail about how you can understand all of the different pieces of revenue that can support your preschool programming and the different ways that you can look at how you spend it. But I do think it's helpful for us to keep in mind that we know the research is really good that helping children when they're very young, from birth until they're entering kindergarten and beyond, but certainly that these early years are a really critical time when investments that we make early are able to pay off in the long run, both in terms of avoiding other costs that will be incurred later on down the line, and also in terms of improving student outcomes. So I think it's helpful for us to remember that as we're seeking to lead the world in the success of each student, starting long before a 5-year-old child walks through a kindergarten classroom door for the first time is really essential to our success. And one piece that we know is that early childhood needs really do vary from community to community. This is something that we consistently hear as we conduct focus groups, as we visit with Kansans, and something that we know that Kansas communities are very different and that there's no one-size-fits-all approach when it comes to making sure that young children and their families get the best possible start in life. We know that communities have different needs when it comes to determining the mix of services that they need to provide to support their needs, and we also know that depending on what community you're in, this might look really different in terms of whether it is the school district that's the primary partner in providing early childhood opportunities or other community partners. And we're lucky that in Kansas, the way that our preschool finance system is set up really does create a lot of opportunity for districts to partner with other partners in the community, if that works best, and in some cases to be able to enroll students who are attending in non-district settings as students in the district and to generate funding. So today we are focusing on preschool. That's not because preschool is the only strategy for supporting kindergarten readiness. We know that there are a variety of ways that districts might want to make sure that the children and families in their community are receiving really high quality early childhood services. And depending on the community that you're in or the investments that you're making, that mix might be different. But we want you to be thinking about things like Kansas Parents as Teachers or other parent education programming, summer jumpstart programs for incoming kindergarten, wraparound childcare, really strong outreach to engage families in your community starting at birth, efforts to make sure that children have access to the health and economic supports that they need. There are a lot of different ways that communities can focus on early childhood. Today, we are focusing on preschool, and our team has been focusing on preschool because the financing for it is particularly complicated, and because we receive a lot of questions from districts in terms of how they're able to address this need. So certainly, if you have questions about other types of early childhood opportunities, our team would love to visit with you about them. And the Kansans Can Star recognition system, specifically the kindergarten readiness rubric, might be a helpful place for you to go to evaluate your current state of early childhood programming from a comprehensive level and think about where you might want to improve. Especially as districts seek to expand the preschool programming that is available in their community, it's really important to consider how you can combine your preschool programming so that you are not operating separate and segregated early childhood settings based on children's backgrounds and fundings, but that you're really able to create integrated classrooms that are able to provide quality, inclusive services to all students regardless of their background and demographics. We are here and we're really committed to helping you in this very important work. So please do know that if this is something that you would like to do in more detail, our team would really love to connect with you to understand where you're at and understand how we can support you to getting to where you would like to be. I am saying at the very beginning that it is critically important for any of this to make sure that you have good, strong, accurate data that is reported in the kids collection system. So here on your screen are a couple of different resources that can support that. And if your district does not already have really strong partnerships between your early childhood administrators and the district staff who are responsible for entering students into the kids collection system, I would encourage you to help create and strengthen that partnership, because you really do need strong communication information to understand the demographics of particular students, to make sure that those are reported correctly, and to make sure that you are accurately reporting which students are benefiting from which sources of funding. That is really important to making sure that you receive the funding that you should be through the school finance formula, and that you are complying with the associated grant requirements for the various funding opportunities that are available. So today we're going to be going over 3 resources that are available if you visit www.ksde.org and navigate to E for early childhood. On that website, if you scroll down, there's a section on early childhood funding, and you'll find each of these 3 resources. I'll start with the one here on the bottom. If what you're looking for is a good, solid overview of the various funding options that can support your early childhood programming, this 2021 KSDE TASN Summer Leadership Conference recording is about 34 minutes long, and it goes through in detail each of these different funding sources and includes the slides. So if what you're looking for is a good, solid overview to get up to speed, this is the best place to go for that. You'll also find, and I'll pull it up here in just a second, a handout that we shared with all districts during the summer budget workshops this last year. So you can see here on your screen a 1-page front and back information sheet, and this is some good, really high-level takeaways that we want to make sure everybody has on their mind as they're considering their budgets and their preschool funding and their parents as teachers funding for this current school year and for next year. At the top, you'll note, and we want to emphasize that we want to make sure that districts are aware that 2 types of preschool students are each counted as 1/2 student or a 0.5 FTE in calculating a district's enrollment. These are preschool age students with disabilities and 4-year-old students who are eligible for preschool aged at-risk funding. So each of these students is counted as a 1/2 student when counting a district's enrollment. And this is really important, they also can generate any accompanying weightings. So for instance, if one of these children would qualify for free lunch based on their family's income or other eligibility requirements, then they would generate the associated state at-risk weighting for a district's at-risk funding. And it's important to remember that district at-risk funding can be used to support qualifying preschool students in doing things like providing children with quality early learning opportunities. So you want to make sure that you are reporting all of these students in the kids collection system. This should include any Head Start students who are enrolled in your district who meet the associated demographic characteristics of these 2 groups of students, because those students generate funding in the school finance formula for students. So that is the first piece here on this fact sheet. We also highlight some important pieces regarding grant programs. So for the Kansas Preschool Pilot Grant, we want districts and grantees to be aware that this is a fixed amount of funding and that the demand for funding continues to remain much, much larger than the amount of funding that we have available to distribute out. So as you're thinking about how you might be able to sustain and grow your program, we would highly encourage you to be looking to other sources of funding like state school finance formula funding, special education funding, and federal Head Start grants, just to name a few. So as we move forward, as we look ahead to next school year, districts who are applying for these grant funds are going to first demonstrate that they're reinvesting all other available sources of funding into their preschool programming before they request this grant funding to supplement any gaps. So districts should plan accordingly. This is a good time to be evaluating and looking to see whether you are already spending these other sources of funding on your Kansas Preschool Pilot or on your district preschool program, or whether you should consider adjusting those levels so that you can be prepared to do that in the 2022-2023 school year. Similarly, for the Kansas Parents as Teachers Grant, we do want to highlight that this is a fixed amount of funding that's available at the state level, and so that is fixed funding that comes through to districts each year from the state grant. However, we know that districts have other sources of revenue, specifically local sources of revenue, that they can use to be able to maintain services and account for things like increased inflation and cost of living. So we've had a really terrific group of Kansas Parents as Teachers program administrators and stakeholders who have been working with our agency over the past summer to consider how we might address and evaluate this situation moving forward. And we really appreciate the feedback that they've provided. But we would encourage you as a school district to be considering and recognizing this context that this is a set amount of grant funding that's available at the state level. And so it would be very helpful for districts to consider increasing local sources of funding to maintain existing levels of service or to expand services if that's something that you're interested in doing. The next resource and final resource that I want to talk to you about today is to give you a quick walkthrough of a new tool that we've created that I referenced earlier. So this is the Kansas Preschool Revenue Calculator and Budget template. Again, you can find this by visiting ksde.org and selecting E for early childhood. And the purpose of this template is outlined here at the top. It is to help districts estimate their preschool revenue and budget across different funding sources. So we've heard that this can be a challenge to understand the revenue that's coming in and to also understand how you can allocate it out. And we hope that this is a tool that can be helpful to you at the local level as you are seeking to grow and expand your early childhood programming. I do want to note districts are definitely not limited to spending just the amount of funding that's generated by preschool students on preschool. We know that many communities recognize that really wonderful return on investment that I talked about earlier and decide to invest early in their preschool programming so that they can save money and improve outcomes later on. We also want to highlight that districts are not required to spend all of the state aid generated by preschool students on preschool programming, just like there is no requirement that you spend all of the funding that's generated by your third graders strictly on your third grade students. However, as I mentioned earlier, for the 2022-2023 Kansas Preschool Pilot Grant, districts applying for funds will use this template to first demonstrate that they're reinvesting other available sources of funding, like their state enrollment aid and accompanying weightings, their special education funds, their federal Head Start grants, to fund their preschool programs before they request that Kansas Preschool Pilot Grant funding to supplement gaps. So this is a really good and critical time for you to be using this template and getting familiar with it. We really appreciate any feedback that you have, and we anticipate that we'll take any feedback that we receive into consideration as we update this and make it even more user-friendly for the grant application, which we will release later in the fall. So the key piece of information that you need to answer this template is that you should only edit cells that are highlighted in yellow, like this one right here that says district number. You want to begin by filling out this district number form, as that will pre-populate some other pieces. Other things in this preschool budget template and revenue calculator are locked so that the formulas are intact. And we would highly recommend that you not export this to Google Sheets or some other form, because there are some formulas that are built in here to be able to auto-populate and provide you some really nice summaries, and those might not work if you export them somewhere else. So really, it's quite simple. We'll go through each of these 3 tabs here, and you'll be able to see how you might fill this out. So to start, the very first thing that you want to do when you open this is, of course, to save it somewhere and to save it frequently. And then after that, you can go here to cell C14 on the very front instructions and summary page. This is the only place where you will, or this is the only cell that you'll need to enter anything in on this first instructions and summary page. The rest will auto-populate based on what you enter in on the next 2 tabs. But you'll go ahead and type in your district number, and that will auto-populate some background information. So the first thing that you'll see is whether or not the Kansas State Board of Education has approved your preschool aged at risk program for the upcoming school year. And then you'll also see a message that will indicate whether or not your district is currently meeting the state performance plan requirements for indicator 6, which relates to the extent to which preschoolers with IEPs receive special education and related services in the least restrictive environment. As I mentioned earlier, this is something that is really important to consider, especially as you are expanding your preschool services. We know that in many places, many districts had preschool programming for students with disabilities long before they had any other preschool options that were available in their district. And especially as you're expanding, that creates a great opportunity for you to make sure that you are creating more opportunities for your students with disabilities to learn in the inclusive environments that they should be learning in with their peers who do not have disabilities. So you can see here an example of a district There we go. Here you can see an example of a district that is not currently meeting the state performance plan targets for one or both of these indicators, and it highlights that if you would like some additional support in this area, you can contact Julie Rand to provide technical assistance. I would also highly recommend that you check out the KSDE TASN Summer Leadership Conference materials, which include some very helpful recordings that provide an overview of Indicator 6 and help you understand how this information is calculated. It also is important to note that a district should be meeting the state performance plan targets for Indicator 6 in order to be eligible for STAR recognition in the area of kindergarten readiness. So you will fill in your district number, and that will auto-populate some other pieces, as I shared, and then you will come through to the Kansas Preschool Revenue Calculator tab on your spreadsheet. Again, you'll only enter information into these yellow highlighted cells, and you'll see information first for the current school year and then for the second school year. It's important for each of these, so when it asks how many 4-year-old preschool aged at-risk students are enrolled, that's asking for the head count of students who are enrolled. So for instance, if you're serving 10 students this current school year and all 10 of them meet this preschool aged at-risk program requirements and are 4 years old, you'd type in 10 here. You'd remember that each of these students are counted as a half student, and so your FTE, right, 10 times 0.5 would be 5, but here we want you to enter in head count, not FTE. So that's the first number that you'd enter in. And then there's a second question that asks, okay, of these 10 4-year-old preschool aged at-risk students, how many of these students qualify for free lunch? And so it might be that 6 of these 10 students qualify for free lunch, and you'd type that in here. We do note when we say qualify for free lunch here, we know that all students qualify for free meals in the upcoming year due to pieces related to pandemic relief. And here, when we ask about qualifying for free lunch, we are asking about the same classification that you would use for the state at-risk funding for your K through 12 students. So it's students who are certified either using the KSDE Household Economic Survey or through direct certification, and it's something that corresponds to that at-risk weighting. If you're looking for a good place to get these answers, as I mentioned earlier, it's really important to attend those Counting Kids workshops and to make sure that students are reported correctly in the kids collection system, because it's the data from kids that is then audited and it determines whether or not your district is receiving the associated at-risk funding for these students. So even if your preschool age students are not eating lunch because maybe it's a half-day program, you should still be collecting information about their economic situation so that you can determine whether or not they would qualify for the state at-risk weighting and the associated funding. An important note here on this question, so you only have 10 students in this hypothetical district that is on the screen that are 4-year-old preschool aged at-risk students. And so this number that you respond to here, how many of these 10 students qualify for free lunch, this number should be equal to or less than 10. So obviously it wouldn't make sense to say that 15 of these 10 students qualify for free lunch. And so if you type in a number that's larger here, you'll get this error message on the right saying that it should be less than or equal to the number that you've just entered in. You'll then do the same thing here for your preschool students with disabilities. This should be any of your 3- and 4-year-old preschool students with IEPs or disabilities who are enrolled. Yes, this does include any students who have an IEP just for speech services. And just as you did above, you'll enter in the number of students who you have enrolled and also the number of those students who qualify for free lunch. And then this last number, how many other preschool students are enrolled, just relates to any other students who you have who don't fit into one of these above categories. So this might be your 3-year-old preschool aged at-risk students. This might be your students who are supported with parent tuition or that the district funds who do not meet any at-risk criteria or who are funded through some other funding source. So it might be that you have 10 of these students as well. And so once you've typed in these 3 numbers here, then this number here in blue will auto-populate, and this should be the total number of preschool students who you have enrolled for the 21-22 school year. So if you're looking to double-check your work, you know how many preschool students who you have enrolled in your district or who are enrolled as students in your district, and that should match the number in this blue cell. One important note, we would encourage you as you're doing this to be obviously pulling your data together and really getting it good and organized. The principal's building report is a good place to go to check your work and see how many students are being reported in the kids collection system and to see how many students are reported from each of these funding streams. And then you'll see here that the spreadsheet auto-populates the amount of state enrollment aid that is generated from both of these first two categories of students, and then also the number of preschool students who account for state at-risk funding. And underneath each of these things, you'll see in italics here, the information that shows you how these pieces are calculated. The next section on the spreadsheet relates to categorical aid reimbursement, and both of these two resources are very helpful and pieces that I'd recommend that you review as you are completing this. So as you are, this first question asks what FTE of teachers are claimed in the early childhood special education service model for categorical aid reimbursement. So you can go to the KSDE Special Education Reimbursement Guide and review the 2 pages that provide an overview of the different service models for categorical aid reimbursement for early childhood. The early childhood special education service model is the service model that's sometimes referred to as the 50-50 model. But of course, the 50-50 model does not require that 50% of students in a classroom have a disability in order to claim categorical aid under that model. So the reason why this piece is really helpful is that it gives you the opportunity to see to see what the prorated amount of funding will be for a classroom where the ratio is less than 50%. And so this first line should be the FTE of all teachers who are claimed in the early childhood special education service model who are claimed. We've linked here in the spreadsheet to the KSDE Fiscal Auditing Early Childhood FTE Calculator, where you can type in the ratios from each individual classroom. For ease, we can say that of the 30 students enrolled, perhaps they're in perhaps they're divided into 2 classrooms, and in each of these classrooms we know that there are 10 total preschool students with IEPs and then 20 other students. So that would tell us that we would take the number of students with disabilities, which is 10, and multiply that by 2, which would be 20. And then we would divide that number by the total number of students, which would be 30. So we can see that assuming that these students are evenly spread out in a classroom that maybe has a morning and afternoon session, or all together for one teacher, that would give us a prorated FTE of 0.7 for that teacher. And similarly, for paraeducators who are claimed in the early childhood special education model, you would enter that in, and it would enter in the calculation for the number, or for the categorical aid that they'd receive. Here at the bottom, we ask about the FTE of other preschool staff who are claimed for categorical aid reimbursement. An important note for our districts who maybe provide services in an itinerant model, or who budget for these services separately from their preschool programming budget. What we'll want to see for the preschool pilot grant application, we'll want to see all of the sources of revenue and all of the expenditures that are associated with your preschool program. So if when you're budgeting you are requesting funds or budgeting for the special education staff who serve your preschool program, then you should include that FTE of preschool staff here. If your district or your local education agency handles that entirely separately and doesn't consider the costs of, say, your occupational therapists who serve preschool students in your preschool budget, then you don't need to try to back out the FTE of their time that would be associated with preschool. If you have any questions, you can feel welcome to follow up with us on that. And then here at the bottom are listed other potential sources of revenue. So these may or may not all apply to your district, but we do want to help get you thinking about the different possible ways that your district might be able to fund early childhood programming. So this additional district general fund transfer would be any additional revenue beyond what's generated by enrollment aid for preschoolers that the district transfers to support their early childhood programming. You can see other pieces listed here. The piece that will be important for you as you are filling this out for your Kansas Preschool Pilot Grant application will be that if you are requesting requesting grant funds to support a particular area, then you should include the associated revenue source. So for instance, if you're requesting Kansas Preschool Pilot grant funding to support the cost of transporting students to and from your preschool program, then you should estimate and calculate the amount of transportation aid that you're getting back through the school finance formula for your students who are included in the school finance formula, or any special education reimbursement that you're getting back for transporting students as outlined in their IEP. Similarly, if you're requesting funding in your grant for meals and snacks, then you should include the amount of reimbursement that you're getting through meal programs like the Child and Adult Care Food Program or the National School Lunch Program. If you have questions about these pieces, feel welcome to let us know. This will give you a total revenue piece at the bottom. If you've entered in your district's USD number on the front page and your district already has a Kansas Preschool Pilot grant, then that will auto-populate here. And when you're done, this will give you all the potential different sources of revenue that your district might use to support your early childhood program. We do want to make sure that you're thinking about all of the different students who you serve. So as you're filling this out, you should be considering students who are served by other partners, either by private entities who you contract, if you have a special education cooperative or interlocal that provides services for preschool students and those students are enrolled in your district, you'll want to take into account all those different sources of revenue as you're filling out the calculator. And then you'll see that for next school year, it's exactly the same, except for the grant application, there will also be an opportunity for you to describe how this was determined for each of these pieces. So you'll be able to describe, here's how we estimated the number of students who will serve in the upcoming year, and so on. Then finally, the last tab that you'll fill out is the preschool budget template. And this similarly has a section at the top for this current school year and then a section farther below for the upcoming school year. And here it will be pretty simple. You have an opportunity in column B to type in a description of a particular funding source. And then it's very, very important that you select something here in column C to appropriately categorize this. We do link to the Kansas Accounting Handbook for guidance. And if you scroll down and select something that's not one of the other options, then you can describe that in the column far to the right where you will describe how this was calculated. But it's very important that you select this because it will allow the front instructions and summary tab of the spreadsheet to automatically calculate some of these pieces into a summary table for you. For ease of budgeting, we're going to imagine that this budget spends $100,000 total on teacher salaries, and we'll remember that we were claiming 0.7 FTE of the teacher or of the teaching staff for categorical aid reimbursement. And so we'll want to make sure that at least 70% of those staff salaries are paid for out of special education and related funds. And then for ease of addition, we will add a 0 there. We'll say that the remaining is paid for out of preschool aged at-risk funds. So this blue column that auto-populates should be the total amount of money that you are spending from all of these different funding sources on whatever the item is that's listed here. And again, this column C should make sure that you have something that's selected to be able to show what function or subfunction and object code is associated with that expenditure. And then here on the right-hand side, you have an opportunity to describe this expenditure and how it was determined or calculated. You'll fill this out for both 2021, 2022, and then you can scroll down to see next school year. And then once you've completed both this revenue calculator tab and the budget template tab, you can come back to the instructions and summary page, and you can scroll down to see that the forecasted revenue from pre-K has auto-populated, the total budget expenditure that you've entered in from the spreadsheet has populated. You'll be able to see some summary pieces here as it relates to the revenue that you're receiving, your anticipated expenditures, and the revenue minus the expenditures. And then if you scroll down a bit farther, you'll be able to see some of this information broken out by funding source to be able to help you as you're budgeting across these various items. So that was a very quick overview, and I'm sure that all of you will have questions. There is a user manual that will be posted soon, or by the time that this post will already be posted on the KSDE Early Childhood webpage. If you have any questions as we're filling this out, we really do want to make this a tool that is useful for you. So please feel very welcome to reach out to me as you have questions, or if you see additional features that would be helpful to complete this template for your district. So, in terms of next steps, as I said, you can feel very welcome to email any questions and feedback regarding that preschool revenue calculator and budget template tool to me, Amanda Peterson, at apeterson@ksde.org. And if you're planning to apply for the 2022-2023 Kansas Preschool Pilot Grant, I'd encourage you to begin working through this and preparing to submit that as part of your grant application. We plan to release that request for proposals by November. You can, of course, stay very connected to the early childhood team. You can join our early learning listserv by emailing Becky Strom to be able to make sure that you are getting any recent updates from our team or new opportunities to get engaged and to work on these issues. I'd also, if you and your community are working to expand early childhood opportunities, there's a lot of work happening across the state in this space, and we know that there is likely to be quite a bit more federal funding that is under consideration that may be available to communities in the future. So if you're not already signed up for the All In for Kansas Kids weekly email updates, I'd really encourage you to visit the Kansas Children's Cabinet website, which is kschildrenscabinet.org, and scroll to the bottom to sign up for those weekly email updates, because that will make sure that you'll be able to see those funding opportunities and other opportunities as they come through. And then, of course, you can visit our KSDE Early Childhood webpage, which is ksde.org. Under E for Early Childhood, for any other information, there's a very handy events calendar that is helpful for making sure that you've got the appropriate deadlines on your calendar. And there's also a collection of our monthly early childhood program updates for you to review. You can feel very welcome to be in touch with me if you have any questions. I appreciate you working through this, and we look forward to supporting you as you work to grow early childhood opportunities in your community.